started. Good morning to those of you online and in person. Thank you for making it here. It's a pleasure to see some faces I know and others that I'm sure I'll get to know. I'm here to introduce Dr. Purang Abolmaesumi, who is was a distinguished visitor at Queen's University this week and is visiting Victor as well as a guest. Dr. Abolmaesumi is a professor at the University of British Columbia in electrical and computer engineering. And I should know all of this by heart. I've known him for a very, very long time, longer than I want to say. I'll age myself, but with associations with departments of urology and biomedical engineering. He is internationally recognized for his research program in machine learning and image-guided diagnosis and intervention. He is a distinguished university scholar at UBC, the recipient of Killam Faculty Research Prize, Killam Award for Excellence in Mentoring, and the Killam Faculty Research Fellowship at UBC. So he has excellence on all fronts, mentorship, research, and teaching. He is the associate editor of the IEEE Transactions on Medical Imaging. He has been the associate editor for IEEE TBME, another one of the leading journals in the field. He is the board member of all of our, in fact, international societies in this field, in computer-aided surgery, in medical image computing and computer-assisted interventions, and in the Society for Optics and Photonics. He was the general chair of some of our main conferences, IPCAI 2014-15, the program chair of IPCAI 2012, and then he has been a leader in McKay Society, which is our main leading scientific meeting since 2011, most recently as the program chair, as well as the local chair for McKay 2023. He is a member of the Royal Society of Canada, a fellow of McKay, a fellow of the Canadian Academy of Engineering, and a lot of other awards that I'll stop reading now so we can listen to his talk. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to see some of the former students, colleagues, friends, and also from all of you, I guess, coming to this in this nice, I guess, summer day, taking days away from your vacation. For this talk, it's really a great pleasure to be in this space. Okay. And in some way, this talk is really focused really on this picture on the right-hand side. And it's a story of this book that we wrote back during COVID time. And kind of it's some of the journey that we took kind of to try to give some meaning, I guess, to maybe some of the recognitions that have been mentioned, because for me, it really was always about the patient care and impact on it. So this is my team. I mean, a lot of the work that I'm presenting here is the work of these guys, and some of you came to McKay in Vancouver last October. I mean, it was a fantastic space, so it's a great place to organize, I guess, conferences. So really encourage to have everybody back, I guess, to Vancouver, maybe for future conferences. I co-direct one of the labs in the department called Robotics and Control Lab, but the lab has mainly focused in the past almost 10, 15 years, focus on medical imaging. And the number of partners that we have across the province is varied. I mean, we go from BC Women's, BC Cancer Agency, Urologic Center, and radiation oncology. And there's a lot of projects. And in fact, we are also fortunate to have a number of, I guess, CFAR chairs, some of them in this room, I guess, collaborating with us, writing grants with us. And I also highly encourage, I guess, the Vector folks, like really reach out to us and we can actually work together effectively. The story of this talk mostly focused on the image on the left-hand side, which I guess most of you know. It's basically echocardiography. And the talk really centers around kind of how I kind of came to the story of this book. This book was written in collaboration with colleagues while basically during the COVID time period, we were placed in some kind of a incubator on campus. But these colleagues are from philosophy, English, law, policy, and the objective of this activity as part of the Peter Wallace for Advanced Studies really was to bring together in a very non-conventional kind of setting a group of people who have nothing in common with each other, and they try basically now force them through providing a lot of wine and beer and dinner to people to talk to each other and in a relaxed environment and see if there is an outcome. So, for example, if you search for fashion design and cancer imaging, and go to Google Images, there is actually a collaboration from a group before us that they brought a cancer biologist who basically images, microscopic images of cancer cells, printed it on women's dress, and they have these beautiful dresses of women, for example, that I don't know if they can order anymore, but the designs were very amazing. Our approach was writing this book, which is a very kind of a chapter type book, but then the whole point was, okay, we have to talk at the same language. And as part of it, they also brought artists, and we had to work and communicate with these artists to kind of visualize our research. And this image really is a kind of a perspective of the current healthcare system that we have, at least from the artist's perspective, where we have the bird at the bottom, where you have a kind of representation of the patients in the urban settings, we have access to a lot of resources. And then you have patients in First Nations communities, rural areas, who have really very little access to resources. And really the objective is really to build a kind of a next generation healthcare system for everybody with equal access. And it brings a lot of policy and privacy and everybody else, I guess, that these birds are representing. So the kind of the chapter that they wrote really is based on this map, really it's British Columbia, obviously, and the challenge really that is there is the access. So there's a lot of patients distributed all over the province, and these patients really sometimes, even during the winter time, to get access to the first line imaging, for example, they have to travel for a day, stay somewhere for a day, come back. Lots of expense for the family, hassle for everybody, and also then occasionally also they have to be flown to Vancouver, and each travel to Vancouver costs about $20,000 for the taxpayer. So the whole point was, what can we do about it? And if you think about it, one of the very interesting inventions that happened 200 years ago, 208 years ago, was stethoscope. They're basically giving access to physicians some technology that can actually just go beyond just looking at the patient. But obviously, we have a lot of technologies now. We can do a lot better. And one of the modalities that is very promising is ultrasound imaging. And it's growing fairly fast. The market share of it among all imaging, I guess, technologies is very high. And also it's real time, dynamic. And also thanks to all of the miniaturization, it's becoming fairly accessible. Now you can buy these devices, from different manufacturers for about $2,000 to $5,000 roughly, and then you can connect it to your phone and basically use it as a more modern stethoscope. So back in 2013, I was, I guess, maybe with Anne, I guess we went to, the Japan Mikai, I guess. And suddenly at 5 in the morning, I had a call from the secretary of the head of echocardiography in Vancouver, Dr. Teresa Sang. She said, you know what, I was looking for somebody with knowledge of ultrasound on campus, and I found you. So we have a grant, a CHRP grant at the time, letter of intent due in 5 days. It's typical. And would you like to work with me? So like, what's the problem? So the problem was that, so Teresa on the left runs her lab, you know, they have about, I think, 25,000 patients a year, but they use these fancy machines, few $100,000 machines with years of experience, that they have in acquiring data from these patients. But then she was getting more and more of people who are non-experts, I guess non-cardiologists, I guess, who are buying these devices, putting in their pocket, going around the hospital, getting images from a patient, and then emailing it to her and say, tell me what is wrong with this patient. And she was saying, well, I can't do it without the context, so you have to send me the patient. And that was creating a backlog, you know, so 3 months to 6 months backlog, at least for the patient to be seen. And then her kind of solution, and the reason she could find me, was that let's build a robot together so that I can sit in my office, use a joystick, and remotely monitor basically the motion of the transducer to image the patient. So interestingly, this is my PhD thesis back in 99. We did a tele-ultrasound between Vancouver and Montreal. We showed that it's possible on a T1 connection. You know, we could do tele-ultrasound, but also because of this experience, I knew it's not the solution, because really it's bulky, patients are scared of it, the robot can go unstable, and the hand-eye coordination remotely with a joystick to manipulate an ultrasound transducer is not intuitive. So I told her, look, I don't think this is the solution. That was right at the beginning wave of the deep learning kind of 2012 time period. And I said, look, okay, how much data do you have? And then I try to understand the problem a bit more. And obviously you can look at the anatomy. I mean, it's a very complex anatomy that's moving. Just as a side real joke, I guess, I was in a thesis exam of a grad student in France. I asked the student, so this technology that you have developed for what motion control, does it work on the heart? And then the answer was, well, the problem with the heart is that it moves. So you can stop it, and then the problem is solved. But the challenge really is that it's a very complex anatomy. And then cardiologists, that's why they go through years of experience to learn basic hand-eye coordination. So there is a set of about 14 standard views, but also our suits of Doppler acquisitions that they did from the heart. And they basically navigate through this very complex set of views. And each view represents the anatomy or cuts the anatomy in a very specific cross-section. And it gives a specific answer or a hypothesis, clinical hypothesis to the physician. So you can think about this as more of a kind of a GPS navigation problem. So you sit in your car, you go from point A to point B, and really you navigate between these views. And interestingly, first we thought we have to solve this problem, but we realized at the time that it just was so hard because the variations among patients is huge, and there is obviously differences between sexes. And it's a very challenging problem at the time. We didn't know how to solve it. But today, you can buy FDA-cleared devices. There is now about, I think, 4, 5, 6 different companies that are doing this. And they provide you this navigation interface that you can go from point A to point B with guidance. Now, the problem is when you get close to the view, and for the majority of the people, when you get close to the view, then it's as if now you have to park, yeah? And you don't use the GPS and Google Maps for parking. So it's a different type of basically sensory input that you're using. And we thought, you know what, that should be a simple problem for us to tackle. So we actually looked at the problem. So you can think about cross-section in the anatomy, and you want to get a perfect kind of cross-section of the, for example, different cardiac chambers. And this is kind of what we did. We kind of try to identify kind of features and properties of these images that actually give you the right cross-section of the anatomy versus getting a suboptimal cross-section of the anatomy that would then lead to a wrong diagnosis. So we built a team, and over the years it has grown. A lot of students have contributed to this. And we also approached the privacy team back in 2013, and kind of at the time, kind of asking for many hundreds of thousands of patient records was a bit of an unknown entity to the health authorities. But after a lot of kind of discussion and setting kind of checkpoints in place for ensuring privacy and patient anonymity, we kind of got our hands on a good chunk of the data that were on PACS, and it started kind of tackling the problem of, for example, parking basically in echocardiography. So you can think about it as kind of the picture I drew at the time, basically call it traffic light technology. Kind of when you're in the right orientation, you get green versus red. And we actually wrote these apps that were running on an Android phone, kind of getting the quality and also estimating different kind of measurements from the images, and it started running clinical studies using some kind of a frame grabber attached to the back of the machine, and basically demonstrating that actually it impacts the user kind of behavior in terms of the acquisition. What also interesting it was that the experts hated it. Why is that? Because the expert goes to the view, they think that's the perfect view they can get, and then the AI says, oh, you're only 60%, and they basically were disagreeing with the AI. Whereas residents, fellows, nurses loved it because basically it was helping them achieve something that wasn't possible for them before. And while we were kind of developing this, running a study, and then advertising it to the local community that we can do this. In 2019, the feds obviously announced the supercluster program, and I think it was about a $300 million investment in digital technologies. One of them was healthcare, and we were approached by the St. Paul's Hospital, which is a local hospital in downtown Vancouver, to put a proposal together. And the reason they approached us wasn't really about echocardiography. It was because St. Paul's, with their new CEO, they were trying to raise money from the donors to move from downtown to outside downtown Vancouver. And they wanted to become a flagship hospital in the eyes of the donors as basically research intensive institution. So anyway, both aligned, and we gave this proposal. This was one of the fastest $2 million I had raised. Basically, within a week, we had a research proposal. We went in front of a panel. We showed them this image. We said, look, give us $2 million. We'll distribute these ultrasound devices across the province, all interconnected to a cloud system. But that was a 2-year project. So from 2020 to 2022, and then suddenly COVID happened. And then they said, okay, what can you do to do it in 6 months? And then they gave us another $500,000. And basically, we really ramped up fairly rapidly with the companies. And this was distributed fairly quickly across the province. And today, this network is about, I think, 100 devices that are all interconnected. So it allows teleconsultation, covers about 30,000 patients a year. And they're using it for different procedures, including obstetrics, echocardiography, and at the time for COVID was also lung imaging. Obviously, this gave us a lot of kind of national news, accolades. There was a lot of patient testimonials on what impact it had made on patient and also physicians kind of are using it effectively for teleconsultation. Even the Ministry of Innovation talked about this in a video, I guess, posting, and also made its way kind of to the budget 2021 that was announced. But then as this was evolving, the real question really for me as a researcher was, gosh, no, we basically let this part of the lab suddenly went into the community. And is this something that we did irresponsibly? And the reason was kind of the history of some of the technologies that were just deployed without checks in patient care and led to disaster. So there's obviously a lot of also companies that are pushing the front line for getting the AI over the line. And the main really question was, okay, what can we do now with this network of devices and a lot of users to streamline kind of care while we don't cause harm? And obviously, if you look at this diagram from a paper a few years ago, AI can impact our healthcare system in many different ways across the entire chain of care. There is really at the moment a question in terms of what aspects of care it's most effective in. And also from the company point of view, where does it give the most basically, I guess, return on the investment? The nice thing is there is some, I guess, good news coming up from some controlled studies that are being run globally. This is the work from Chiron Medical from UK, for example, that they ran a very large study with NHS, and they actually showed that using AI, it reduces the workload of human by about 30 to 40%, but also they could detect cancer 4 years earlier than radiologists without missing a single cancer. So that was a very big, I think, kind of innovation that was recently announced, I guess last November. And so a lot of groups, this is the work from Google that are also showing that generative AI is promising. You know, this was the work, I guess, for USMLE, I guess, surpassing the human performance last year. And I guess this year, they came up with this, I guess, announcement a few months ago, where now the Map Gemini is really kind of achieving performance that we hadn't seen before. And now it's becoming multimodal. They're integrating genomics, pathology, a lot of kind of different information sources for different clinical applications. The interesting thing is actually this curve is plateauing. The question is how far it's going to continue. And we'll see soon, hopefully. But one of my students thought, okay, so let's get one of these models just for fun, because we, as part of our workflow in echocardiography, years ago, we built this view classifier tool, because you can see these 14 views, we get unorganized data from the PACS, and we needed to classify the views. So we wrote our own deep learning module, but then we thought, okay, so these tools are very powerful. So let's just give the views and and ask the model to classify it for us. And obviously, zero-shot assessment of these models was not great. So for example, this is an apical four-chamber view that we just saw throughout the talk. And the student gave this image to I think one of the models at the time. This is not corrected, by the way, just to clarify, but the model version that was available to download that day, you know, it basically says this is a hate symbol. You know, so the point I'm trying to make is that if you're not an expert and you hadn't watched through the talk, this view, you could have agreed with this model. You know, now this is a simple question. It could be a very complex, you know, disease question. Yeah. And then as a result, you could give a wrong medication to the patient and you can cause harm. So the main really research question for us has been for the past few years, how can we find ways of trusting these models? And And when we look at the field of echocardiography, the first papers kind of using, I guess, machine learning kind of came out 2011. And then now I guess I'm not tracking anymore how many papers are out in 2024. But most of these, I guess, technologies came out to streamline specific assessments. For example, ejection fraction in cardiology, so a specific segmentation task. Really, when we look at the majority of they're not tackling the field of echocardiography as a whole, because in an assessment, you can measure up to 100 parameters. Yeah, you don't have to, but you can, or 200 parameters in fact, that's available in PACS. So the question is that, like there is a big jump from what is in the literature to what actually is possible to fully automate the entire process. The good thing is that companies obviously are working on it. This was a product came out last August from Siemens. And this is a card-based system. It has an AI button. And this machine was trained according to the news release with 80 million echocardiography records, which is well above anything we can do in Canada. But they automated a lot of the parts of the workflow within echocardiography, which is great news. Now, from our perspective, when we think about community and kind of impacting the entire workflow, one thing I ask my students is that who is your user? So you basically, are you optimizing this for the echocardiographer who sees the patient at the end of the kind of the chain of diagnosis, or you're trying to front load it and use it, for example, for a physician in the community? And if you think about the lady on the left, Regina Robinson, who lives about 1,000 kilometers away from Vancouver in Fernie, and Teresa Sang, who is in Vancouver, they have different needs. And the designing technologies for kind of different users really requires us to consider their requirements. So for Teresa now, there is devices that they can buy if they have the money to automate certain parts of their acquisition. But for Virginia, really, what we want to see is that what technology do we need to build for her so that she can basically streamline or prioritize different patients in her community, and then just push through some of the patients that require urgent care or more urgent care to the right, so that they can travel to Teresa. And the nice thing is that for Teresa, now there is devices. Actually, there's a lot of papers that are coming out that they are arguing that AI is interchangeable, for example, with a sonographer that works within Teresa's lab for certain measurements. So, for example, there was a study that came out, I think 2 years ago, that they took 3 sonographers against AI for measuring different cardiac parameters. And they showed that the difference between the sonographers was more than each sonographer and the AI. Yeah. So the effect of the observed variability, once you account for it, there was a lot of kind of promise in terms of AI may be able to be closer even to the gold standard of a measurement than individual observers within that, I think, cohort. Now, going from Teresa to Virginia in the community, as I showed, there is no tools like from these driving companies that are allowing you now to help Virginia acquire high quality data in echocardiography that are guided by AI. And that's again another great news that is actually pushing the boundaries of basically reducing the skill set that you need to acquire high quality data from an expert to maybe moderate to partially novice actually user. And in fact, now there is multiple studies coming out by the companies that have built these devices that even are running studies in Africa, in communities, and they're showing actually that nurses who are novice, they can actually capture certain parameters of the cardiac health with the use of these devices that are equivalent to what if an expert sonographer would acquire. Okay. So this is again great, I guess, news for the community. Obviously, I mean, a lot of these now, once these proof of concept stages, I guess, are developed, they also need to go to population scale analysis. Because, for example, the population in Vancouver is very different from population in Fairview or health or First Nation communities. And a lot of these actually have to be really designed around the needs of that community. And this stage is yet to be done. And there is a lot of challenges as kind of these technologies scale up. So one of the things we observed very early on was the impact of image quality. I mean, you can see the difference between low quality and high quality images for different patients, and any type of image segmentation methodology, for example, that you develop for the image on the right may not easily go to the image on the left. Yeah. And that may cause failure. So kind of very early on, I mean, we developed some tools, for example, for mapping different image qualities at the time using GANs. And they actually showed that if kind of you do some style transfer from low quality to high quality data, you can actually improve the consistency of the segmentation. So in fact, we tightened the standard deviation of the dice, for example, in this case, for segmentation of the left ventricle, which was again good news. I mean, this allowed us to get a bit more reliable measurement from the low quality data. More recently, we have been, and like many of you, I mean, we have been looking at foundation models. So we've been trying to figure out what's the best combination of the power of the foundation models and supervised learning to come up with kind of big labels for echocardiography. Basically, the challenge with echocardiography data is that obviously, in addition to quality variations, the labels are very, very sparse. So you can have a video of, let's say, 200 frames long, but only 2 frames of it are labeled. Yeah. And in addition, you have a lot of variability in the acquisition and labeling. So what can you do with some of the powers of the foundation models to combine kind of the weak labels along with the supervision? And we have been tackling some of the very difficult segmentation tasks in terms of, for example, how do we segment, for example, in this case, myocardium in a very, very poor quality data, so that we kind of can get some assessment of the anatomy and its function. And also, we have been investigating a lot of kind of recent optical flow networks designed for computer vision, and some of the foundation models, again, that are coming out for that task like this, to also combine multiple view measurements, for example, to measure strain, which is another key parameter of the cardiac health. Another task that is in echocardiography is detection of landmarks. And these are mainly used, for example, for estimating, I guess, let's say different lengths, let's say in this case, the left ventricle, and then using the guideline formulas to measure volumes, for example. And so we built, using graph neural networks, we built tools that would kind of measure these landmarks fairly accurately. We used about 40,000 patient records to assess the performance of this across different quality metrics. But then it doesn't always work. And the main question was always, how do we figure out when it doesn't work? So a few years ago, one of my students built a tool using Bayesian networks for estimating the uncertainty of the assessment, so that basically when the image deviates too much from the training data, you don't show anything to the cardiologist. And now we're kind of working more towards kind of figuring out how do we now expand this to kind of more advanced, I guess, machine learning kind of backends. One of the tools that we developed last year was using prototypes. So this figure is very complex, but I just want to explain kind of the context of it and I get to the results. So the challenge kind of we proposed was, can you detect aortic stenosis in echocardiography data? And aortic stenosis, obviously, results in kind of constraint of the blood flow motion from aortic valve. And it's actually a very severe disease. This is the deadliest valve disease that we have. And it happens because of calcification of the valve mostly. Though there are genetic also reasons behind it for subtypes. And it affects more than 5% of the people 65 plus, and the prognosis is not great, specifically the severe disease. So the typical way of diagnosing this is the top part, which is the standard of care. You go to a specific view, in this case called the lung axis view, and you take certain measurements. You also turn on the Doppler. You measure the velocity of the blood flow across the valve, and then again using standard guidelines to make this measurement. The problem with the top flow is that you need an expert cardiographer. You need a very high machine normally, which has a spectral Doppler. Most of the point of care devices don't have it. And even if they have it, the person who is supposed to use it, who is a novice to moderate user, doesn't even know how to acquire this data. Yeah. So then the question we asked from the team was, can we get rid of Doppler altogether? And can we assess aortic stenosis purely based on the E-mode video signatures? And then this is a screening process. Obviously, if you detect the severe disease in the community, then you can send the patients to Teresa, for example, for comprehensive blood. When you look at the literature, I mean, I guess some of the early work came from our own lab. We looked at kind of image-based assessment using some of the earlier encoders that we had, and also, you know, teams like Tufts, for example, are investigating this. The problem with a lot of this work, obviously, including our previous work, was that there are a lot of known black box, mostly looking at the problem, the classification problem, and the image-based, that don't look at the dynamics of the valve movement, and some of them depend on the Doppler availability. So then the question was, can we build an AI system that can localize the region that's using for decision-making and also be interpretable? And also at the same time can tell you when it doesn't know. So there's basically three main requirements here. And we looked at the prototypical networks. Some of the people obviously at Vector are working on it. And we were kind of trying to figure out how could we take some of the literature in this domain and bring it to echocardiography. So we kind of came with whatever loss functions. You can read the paper for it. But really the way that it works is that it uses an encoder to identify kind of a region that is associated with the classification task. And it's also learning from, for example, the entire video clip, which section of the clip is most relevant to this decision-making process. So it's not only doing regional identification, but it's also doing temporal cropping of the video. And then these temporal crops basically are cluster into prototypes. Yeah. And then from there on, then we kind of, for any decision-making, we basically identify the region that is relevant. We say also to the physician, here is the most relevant, I don't know, 3 previous patients that are in this class that is most relevant to this part of the clip that you're trying to make a decision on. So then they can use their own judgment whether the machine is telling them the right diagnosis or not. Obviously, the other challenge was variation image quality. So valve may not be visible all the time. It's actually very difficult sometimes to get the right view, especially for high BMI patients. And then the question was, can we also say when we don't know? And for that, I mean, we used one of the prior work actually from Vector, Ramtello's paper, to also identify kind of an uncertainty metric that kind of assigns an uncertainty label to different section of the clips that we are using for decision making. And then we ran a study with about 2,500 patients. We had about 7,000 clips. And we showed actually that so the proto-ASNet is the result of all of the work that I showed you till now. So the two versions of it, which is using an image-based and video-based. In fact, with prototype-based approach, the key thing that we discovered was you not only have interpretability, but you also, even your accuracy improves. So you're not sacrificing anything. Now, in the coming Mikhail, you're presenting, I guess, another work that is slightly improving this work, using some label noise robust approach. And then the one on the left also is using Doppler measurements, kind of in a multimodal model to learn both from tabular data in reports as well as the image data to improve the robustness of the learning. Obviously, the story doesn't end here. I mean, all of the work that I presented was all image-based. We have the patient history, which the physician has access to, we don't. So that's another kind of part that basically provide context to any of the decision makings and using any of these multimodal foundation models that are coming out to kind of integrate history of the patient in our decision making. So for example, there is the population data BC, and similarly in Ontario, you have equivalent that you have obviously all the medication record, hospital data, the EMR data that you can use to also integrate those with imaging data. Another thing that we are doing is to also bring guidelines, clinical guidelines into the decision making. So one of the things, for example, we recently did, we used language model to take the echocardiography guidelines, the latest ones, and ask the language model to convert it to a knowledge graph. And in fact, actually did a decent job, you know, like this knowledge graph, if you zoom in, many of them make sense, you know, like some of the views actually are interrelated with certain clinical parameters that we expect. So then the question of after this is that how do we combine knowledge graph with, you know, about the population statistics we're learning from reports and tabular measurements in the data, as well as the history of the patients all together to make a decision making that's a lot more robust. So one of the activities that I was involved with, I guess I was the only Canadian who participated in this big guideline development that we call it the Future Guideline, led by Karim Lekadir in also Barcelona now, that kind of tries to kind of put some framework around a lot of these developments in terms of the requirements that are needed for developing and deploying and continuation of the validation of these technologies in healthcare. And I want to thank the funders, and also I want to end with this, I guess, a slide. Kind of as a biomedical engineer, obviously it was very great during this deployment of technology in communities to get testimonials back from patients and healthcare providers. And one of the cases, I guess on the top left, was the story of a patient in 1,000 kilometers north of, I guess, Vancouver, who had depression, you know, who was pregnant, and they wanted to abort the pregnancy, but then because of the availability of an ultrasound in the community, they actually connected with their baby and then sought, you know, mental support, and kind of the story continues from it. But overall, I guess it's just what I really want to end the talk with is that all of these technologies are not about, you know, mean square error or anything else. It's really all about patients. So as long as I guess you can make a difference, really continue the great work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. It's time for questions. I don't know if there are questions online or not, but if you have questions, is it just chat or? Okay, all right. So if you have questions, you can put in the chat, but we'll go to the room meanwhile.
Very inspiring talk. Thank you. I have one question. So are you using off-the-shelf sensors like from different companies, and then you're basically building models for analysis?
So a lot of the work that I showed here was based on archived echocardiography data, which is acquired in clinics with high-end machines. However, we also ran studies using point-of-care devices. I think in our specific use case, I think they used Clarius device and the Philips and the GE, I think. And most of the time, we try not to do any test time adaptation or refinement on those data. Mostly trying to see how these models that are trained, how do they work zero shot in the prospective data. Because getting the prospective point of care data is actually very difficult at the scale that we have in archive data. Our experiments currently show that certain transducers, let's say like Clarius, their image quality is sufficiently high that in the hands of expert, you can acquire images that are very close to the distribution of the training. But in the hands of the novice operator, this assumption will break down. Most likely you will get to out of distribution. And then really the question is this I don't know part of the story. Like, can I detect out of distribution data reliably?
Thank you.
Great talk as always. So my question is about the POCUS network that you amazingly delivered in 6 months with just $2 million. So my question is, how much effort has been put in architecting that infrastructure? Like if Ontario comes to you and say, I want this network, is it not another $1 million? Or you've built the system modular enough that with a couple of small resources, you can deploy that? Or another question, if the GPT-5 comes and you want to deploy it throughout your network, how much is that? Like how much, how long is that?
I'm not paying the bills for these, but it's a good question. So the key components of this network really is the device, obviously the physician who's using the device, then the cloud system and the packs in the cloud, and then connection to the regional hospitals, yeah? So the system is actually fairly modular because you can go now and buy these devices. We tested them with Clarius because that was an industry partner, but a lot of them use a very standard DICOM format. So you could actually transfer any data to the cloud. On the cloud side, the company that worked with us is an offshoot of McKesson, which is a major PACS provider. Change Healthcare. I think they changed their names again to something else. But in any case, they actually repackaged their kind of, I guess, desktop-based client server system for cloud and specifically for POCUS. So that part also can be transferred anywhere across Canada, just installation in the cloud. So most of the challenge, to be honest with you, is not technology. It's a lot of it was agreements between healthcare providers. Like, for example, what we didn't realize was how difficult to get an agreement to get data from Northern Health to Vancouver. Even though it's a patient data, they can consent, but the healthcare authority doesn't necessarily consent. So in fact, the guidelines are also different for community physicians who are running their own clinic outside hospital versus inside the hospital. So a lot of this, I think, is more procedural, not technology today. I mean, it's all really possible. There's 5G connections almost everywhere in northern BC now with Rogers expansion. So ISO in Ontario is happening as well. So it's possible. I mean, and it can make big impact on patients. Yeah.
Great talk, thank you. I think the main hurdle, what I find is for your image analysis, you have to have good images for image. You have good quality image, you need good anatomy. So regardless of what technology you're using, when you don't have the anatomy, that's going to be difficult. And that's our main problem when we're doing echocardiography. And we get new technology, Philips, GE, Siemens, which you were talking about, the least favorite of machines for the cardiographers. They come up with a lot of automated softwares for ejection fraction, strain, etc. We find the automated ones. It's all depends on your image quality. If you don't have that base image, it doesn't matter what technology you're using, AI.
That's a very good question. So that's why, I guess earlier in the talk, I mentioned the technology that they're developing, making sure the quality is correct. It is not a simple problem, but the papers that are now coming out to show that, novice users use the guidance of the quality assessment on the screen can actually get similar quality images to an expert sonographer. It's actually very promising. These are all early days, so nobody has run, except that one of the papers that I showed, they haven't run a random blinded study to actually show equivalence. That one paper that was comparing three novice, operators with AI, that did a decent job, but again, the scale is very small. The questions they were asking from in echocardiography also is a small, like 5 parameters. That's a very valid question. And that's why I also mentioned part of the talk that in some way, anytime I show a technology to a physician, I feel responsible now because whatever I show them, they trust it, but I know it's going to fail. And this is actually a lesson I learned from a sonographer we work with, because we had projects, for example, in spine imaging for placing, needles for anesthesia, for example, with 3D rendering the spine and registration and everything. I knew as an engineer, this thing is not gonna work if the patient slightly moves or change curvature and everything. The physician never questions it. It's on the screen, that's true. And that's why in the guideline that we wrote with the global group, I actually forced them to have a section on this. And it's not just about, I guess, also introduction of the technology, also the impact of the technology on the user behavior. So as you know, one of the studies that ran for mammography, like the late 90s FDA approval for the CAD, led to a disaster when the study retrospectively in 2015 came out that looked at all of the patients that were scanned with that and actually showed a lot of cases were missed. Because when you introduce the technology, for example, in that case, the radiologists, the minute the AI wasn't saying there is cancer in there, they were skipping to the next case. Yeah. And it is a very difficult dilemma right now of you. Obviously companies want to make money, so they are trying to push, market, everything. But the impact of it, I guess, also has to be monitored. Yeah. Thank you.
I have a question. So this is a fantastic technology to use and low resource, right? Not skilled. You showed it in the Canadian context. The incentive of all these companies is to make money. This will be really powerful in low resource, low income, medium income places. Perhaps with a healthcare system that doesn't have infinite money, is not like the Canadian ones that is taxpayer subsidized. What is the incentive of the companies in those economies to want to deploy this, to want to use this? It makes huge patient impact, but who's going to pay for it?
It's a very good question. So through this expansion into BC, we were running through this project development and everything. And one day I was walking my dog in the park, and I was really thinking about this problem. And somebody else came with a dog, and I started chatting to them. And it turned out that she was kind of the director of Health Nations, First Nations, authority, healthcare and everything. And I told her about our project. She said, yeah, I've heard about it. You know what? Technologies like this are actually first adopted by rural physicians, not in the urban centers. And the reason is that the rural physician has nothing else. They just have now one ultrasound device that's added to the stethoscope, and they're desperate to provide quality care to patients. So from the physician and patient point of view, in fact, from a technology care adoption, it actually looks like that the rural actually quickly first adopted of this type of technologies. What we found in our case was that a lot of the physicians were willing to pay out of pocket to buy these devices. Even though in our, the initial expansion of the network, we had 60, I think, transducers all paid for by rural coordination center PC, but many people were ordering them as well. I think, I don't know how much money they would make from, I don't know, 40, 50, 100 rural physicians. But obviously that's one source of revenue for the probe manufacturer and the PACS provider, for example, to expand. But the scale of the profitability is very different in rural than the urban centers. I actually think that at the end of the day, health authority has to pick up the cost, because the incentive of a health authority is not for the patient not to fly to Vancouver. Yeah, so they save 20,000 a patient. So obviously the company is not going to pay for it, but it's overall saving from the, I wouldn't say that reduces the cost, but that $20,000 can go, for example, for treating a cancer patient, for example. So overall, the system wins, but the question of, I guess, revenue for these companies, I actually not clear. Now that you mentioned that Siemens is not the most popular
Every
cardiac.
lab I work, we have like 20 Philips, 20 GE, one single.
So that actually makes a lot of sense that they have put the AI button on it. Because they are trying to catch the market. So the
And
AI
it's the
button.
reason we don't like it is because very automated. And I could tell you the only automated feature that we use in the cardiography, it's not even ejection fraction, because often it's not very accurate. Our sonographers redo things, and it's basically just a strain on the GE, which is very validated.
I see. Yeah, so bringing, for example, one of the slides I showed was a strain. Bringing the strain to POCUS is actually a very big problem. The reason is that for strain measurements, normally high-end machines, they have very high frame rate, high quality image. When you go to POCUS device, you have low frame rate and lower quality. So the question was really, can we do a strain?
You don't need to do strain on POCUS. POCUS, you want to just do it for base high yield stuff. You don't, strain, you do it for something like subspecialized, something extra additional. I find POCUS is something quick. If you want to do strain, you want to do it on a bigger machine.
That's right, but you have access to the bigger machine. So the main question was, if you go to the community,
Yeah.
And the question our cardiologists are asking, can you detect heart failure or screen for heart failure in the community with a POCUS device? I don't know the answer to these. Many of these may be sorted, within a community for a specific type of question. They may only need a stethoscope or fancier, device. Yeah, I don't know whether they will use it or not. What we are showing is that it's possible to do. Obviously, nobody will use it unless it's Health Canada approved. Yeah, so we have to go through that process anyway to figure it out. Yeah.
So in the POCUS model, it seems like you have kind of the means to an end, which is like the actual ultrasound tool, which manufacturers make in different capacities. And then you have the model that you've actually developed, which is powering the guidance and the kind of segmentation. What is stopping the manufacturers of the actual devices from integrating that into their tool and selling that
They're
as a
already doing
product?
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I guess my question is like, what rights does the manufacturer of the tool have to any of the data that you produce as a result of this? And kind of going back to your question about lower income settings, I feel like that's going to be the impetus is for collection of data or building the database. for
It's a very
tools
good
like
question.
this, right?
We actually, during the Mikai last year, we had a visit from a group from China who gave a very fantastic talk of integration of AI in healthcare. They're doing it in massive hospitals. And then the question from the students was, well, companies, big corporations are doing these, so what's our role? And the quote was very interesting for me. He basically said, academic role is to write the first paper. Industry role is to write the last paper. So our job at this in academia, at least for me currently, is to demonstrate that these things are feasible. Obviously, we try to work with companies. For example, in the case of our deployment, where we work very closely with the Clarius engineering team. They had at the time no idea how AI would work on the edge on their device. Yeah, there's a lot of complexity to compressing big models to run in real time on the edge. So we work with them. My engineer actually worked with their team a lot to optimize the backend so that we can run these, and we show that it's possible. Unfortunately, then afterwards I hired my engineer. He's not leading their AI team. But well, at least it worked for him, and it actually was a great collaboration between our companies, between our group and them. But the beauty of it is that now manufacturers are figuring out that these things are possible. The problem, I think, from the manufacturer side is that if academia doesn't show that it's feasible, they wouldn't put the money necessarily to integrate these inside the product. Because, for example, even for the simple case of ejection fraction, if Clarius wants to deploy it, FDA guidelines now requires Clarius to run a study both in Canada and US, with at least 50% of the data coming from the US. Blinded, they demonstrate that it's equivalent to the current ejection fraction measurement on card. So it's a multi-million-dollar study just to do this.
So you're doing the R&D without the cost recovery, and they're doing the cost recovery without the R&D.
They have a small R&D.
Yeah.
Yeah. So their team is obviously busy coming up with this low-hanging fruit FDA things, and many companies are doing the same thing. Most companies that don't have deep pockets like Google, they don't have the bandwidth to look beyond, a few years. Yeah. So they really only look at technologies that are a bit more mature from academia. Is it possible? Whether it's patented, not patented, how to license it, and then go through the validation process.
Big question is who pays for it? No, seriously, that's one reason why companies wouldn't pick up something, because who would pay for it? The insurer in Canada, is the government going to pay the hospital some more money? We had a meeting with a CEO of one of the hospitals in the past few days, and what he was telling us is robotic surgery has been in place for over a decade. So Intuitive's device has been everywhere, and Health Canada is just, so that Health Ontario and they're just starting to give a little bit of top up to hospitals for each procedure. So there's no financial incentive for a hospital to buy that device, which means there's no financial incentive for the company to actually put that money in, to put that feature in the device. So, and then the US is a different company. Billing system.
What I'm hoping is that many of these technologies become like backup camera on your car. You can't buy a car now without the backup camera. So they have to be there, whether they want it or not. It's a part of the package to tendering process.
I think realistically, once software as a medical device becomes clarified from the Health Canada perspective, there's going to be tons of pilot projects from the manufacturer that you've worked with here to deploy it across provinces and states and whatever else, with the interest of collecting that data to further improve their models, right?
My dream would be not even just related to Ultrasound. If there is an infrastructure in place that all the researchers could just have an idea, you go into the cloud immediately, you say, I want this type of patient, I want this model to run, and you actually do it and have the result on the same day. That process is not about a year, but it's possible to do it. there is no barrier right now technologically. It's just the processes are not in place.
Thank you so much for the interesting talk. And I have a question about one of the previous slides. I'm not sure about the slide number. I guess you talked about important elements that should be the output of an ML model. If I remember correctly, you mentioned both localized, like some object localizations and also interpretations.
Yes.
How do you define interpretations?
So this is another in some way controversial, but also very philosophical question. And the way, physicians would think about interpretation is very different from mine in way. For example, for years, GradCam was the way to go because you just look at the heat map, but we're just showing them to physicians. They had no idea what it is, So then we are looking at these type of prototype-based approaches because we say the system is not actually making a decision. It's just telling you this part of the image that may be relevant to this task is very similar to these 5, 6 patients that you have seen before. It's from PACS, so it's your own labels, and you make this decision. And in fact, in the long term, even better, that's kind of what they do for genomics, for example, that this type of medication work for this type of patient. Yeah, so then what do you do with this decision? Yeah, so that's what kind of the mentality is. I don't know whether it's an optimal way of making kind of interpretability visible, but that's one solution, at least we have right now.
Thank you. I'm going to stop our discussions here. Purang is here, lunch is here, so please feel free to speak with him. Thank you very much again.